Can you believe that a woman could be kicked out of a six-star hotel just for dressing simply, while the entire lobby laughed at her? And can you imagine this? 15 minutes later, the very people who mocked her were left speechless, bowing their heads in shame. And you won't want to miss the most powerful twist of the day. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The city lights sparkled as dusk settled over New York. Amid the stream of elegant guests stepping out of luxury cars, a woman in a faded canvas coat, a light grey scarf and a worn backpack quietly approached the main entrance of Langford Royale, the most exclusive six-star hotel in America. Clara Hayes, a social worker at a shelter for homeless youth, had just finished a long day at a Brooklyn drop-in center. Her eyes were sunken from exhaustion, her shoulders weighed down by the bag she carried, but her gaze still held that quiet calm of someone who'd long grown used to doing the right thing without expecting anything in return. She stood before the brass-trimmed revolving door, hesitating for a few seconds. This world was foreign to her, the glittering lobby of the city's priciest hotel, where a single night's stay could cost upwards of $20,000. But her husband, Dominic Langford, owner of the entire Langford Royale chain, had called her just moments ago. "Don't rush home after such a long day. Come rest at the hotel. I've informed the staff. Just walk in." Clara stepped through the revolving door. A cool gust of air greeted her, and the glow of crystal chandeliers danced off the white marble floor, casting her reflection, a figure that stood out sharply against the opulence around her. Italian suits, Hermes handbags, shimmering evening gowns. A few curious glances flicked her way. She walked calmly to the front desk. "Good evening," she said softly. "My name is Clara Hayes. My husband, Dominic Langford, made a reservation for me. He said he already notified the hotel." Behind the desk stood Ethan Brooks, the front office manager. His eyes flicked over her from head to toe. The politeness in his expression vanished in the blink of an eye. He straightened his tie and tapped the counter lightly, as if holding back something less professional. "I'll need to see your ID," he said, voice flat, cold. Clara pulled out her driver's license and handed it to him. Ethan examined it with an exaggerated scrutiny, then glanced sideways at the woman next to him, Sophie Lynn, the junior concierge. Sophie raised a single brow and let out a cold, knowing smirk. "You're saying you're Mr. Langford's wife?" Ethan emphasized the word wife as if it were some kind of joke. "Yes, he said he already called ahead." Sophie cut in, her voice laced with sarcasm beneath a polite smile. "Langford Royale is a hotel for the upper class, Miss Hayes. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Clara's tone remained composed. "I understand, but he really did call. This hotel belongs to him." Ethan pursed his lips and handed back her ID, now visibly irritated. "I'm sorry, there's no reservation under your name, and we have no notes from Mr. Langford. Please, could you check again? He may have just called. Maybe it hasn't updated yet." Sophie sighed, long and loud. "You'd be surprised how many people have come here claiming to be acquaintances, relatives, even wives of Mr. Langford. We've seen it all before." Ethan added, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the budget motels down the street. There's a 2-star place, more suited to the kind of attire you're wearing." A few guests in the lobby turned to look. Whispers began to spread. A server passing by caught sight of Clara, then quickly lowered his gaze and walked away. Clara stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't lash out. She simply said calmly, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to rest after a long day, and he told me to come here." Sophie gave a mocking nod. "In that case, we'll have to ask you to leave the hotel." Clara didn't have time to respond. Ethan had already pressed the call button for security. The hallway door opened. A tall man in a black uniform stepped through. Officer Daniels, Langford Royale's night security was approaching her. The golden chandelier above shimmered, but it wasn't enough to melt the cold that had crept into this place. Not the air, but the kind of cold that seeped out of people. Clara pulled out her phone and opened her recent call log. Dominic Langford's name appeared clearly on the screen, time-stamped less than 30 minutes ago. She held the phone up toward the front desk, keeping her tone calm but firm. "My husband just called. He told me to come here. This is his hotel. Could you please check again?" Ethan Brooks looked at her, lips curling as if he'd just heard a particularly bad joke. "Do you think we're that stupid?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," Clara replied quietly. "I just want a place to rest after a long day." Ethan cast a weary, mocking glance toward Sophie Lynn, who was pretending to focus on her screen, but couldn't quite hide the smirk playing on her lips. She stepped out from behind the desk, arms folded. Langford Royale isn't the kind of place where just anyone can walk in claiming to be the owner's wife, Sophie said, her tone even but glacial. Someone like Dominic Langford doesn't marry. Someone like you. Clara gripped her backpack strap tighter, standing tall. Every word from them stung like a needle, but her gaze didn't waver. Ethan stepped closer, voice dropping to a sneering whisper. "Mr. Langford is the poster child of American high society. His wife attends the Met Gala. She has millions of followers online, and you—" He paused, eyes scanning her from head to toe before shrugging. "Don't even belong in this lobby." Clara took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just need a room. Just as my husband instructed." Sophie tapped her nails against the counter, her voice saccharine and sharp. "Listen, Ms. Hayes, we don't cater to freeloaders, people who think they can just drop the words Langford's wife and get treated like royalty." Nearby, a few guests had begun to watch. Among them was Mrs. Vance, a woman in her 60s draped in a mink coat, flanked by a young assistant. She stepped closer, tilting her head at Clara like inspecting a clearance item in a luxury store. "Handle this discreetly," she murmured to Ethan, loud enough for Clara to hear. "We can't have people like this tarnishing the Langford Royale name." Clara turned slightly and gave her a polite nod. But in Mrs. Vance's eyes there was only pity, mingled with quiet disgust. At that moment, Officer Daniels arrived, summoned by the hotel's internal security alert. Broad-shouldered and imposing, the guard wore a blank, authoritative expression. Ethan gave a curt nod toward Clara. "She's causing a disturbance, claims to be family of Mr. Langford, bothering our guests. Please escort her off the premises, now." Daniels didn't ask questions. He simply stood in front of Clara and gestured silently. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." A hand reached out, not forceful but not gentle either, and closed around Clara's arm. The lobby fell silent. A wave of whispers rippled outward. The stares came next, curious, mocking, disapproving, all fixed on the woman with the low ponytail, worn-out coat, and old backpack, being led away from a place she truly belonged. What none of them knew was that this silence was only the overture. A seismic shift was coming, and the entire hotel was about to kneel before the truth. Clara stood, her wrist held firmly in the center of the grand lobby, surrounded by strangers whose eyes all shared one thing in common. That familiar, repulsive judgment she had seen before. The kind that looked down on anyone not wearing a Rolex or walking in Louboutin. Officer Daniels gripped her wrist, gaze distant, as if this were just another routine. But Clara, heart pounding, kept her back straight. She didn't pull away, she didn't shout, but she didn't bow her head either. "I'm not resisting," she said quietly. "I'm just waiting for my husband." Behind her, Ethan Brooks shook his head in exasperation. "You should do yourself a favor and leave quietly. We don't have time for cheap impersonation stunts." Sophie Lynn stepped beside Ethan, arms crossed. tilting her head as though examining a stain on an expensive carpet. "Don't you get it? Langford Royale doesn't serve the poor." The words fell like a verdict, crashing onto the marble floor with finality. A quiet gasp came from the right side of the lobby. A well-dressed young man, suit sharp, was holding up his phone, recording the entire scene. He chuckled and muttered, "Real-life reality TV, always entertaining." A woman nearby whispered, "Who does she think she is?" Clara remained silent. Her eyelids fluttered, not to hide tears, but to protect the last bit of dignity she still carried. Sophie stepped forward again, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "We've seen plenty like you. Think that one little lie is enough to get treated like royalty. Sorry, we only serve real people with real money." Clara looked Sophie dead in the eyes. "I don't need to be treated like royalty. I just want to be treated like a human being." Officer Daniels began to guide her toward the exit. Clara shifted, pulling her phone from her backpack. Her fingers trembled, but they didn't falter. She opened her messages and typed a short line. "Can you come? I'm okay, but they need to see you." She didn't wait for a reply. She slipped the phone back into her bag and tightened the strap, like a silent warrior preparing to walk through fire. Sophie wasn't finished. This time she raised her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Impersonation, attempted intrusion into a private hotel, disrupting guests. We could easily call the police if we wanted." Clara turned her head slightly, said nothing. But her eyes, calm, deep, and completely unafraid, unsettled a few of the people watching, not because of what they saw in her, but because of what they saw in themselves. No one stepped forward to defend her, not a single soul. The doors to the main entrance stood open. Daniel's grip tightened. And then, a low, smooth, commanding rumble echoed from outside. The unmistakable sound of Rolls-Royce Phantoms gliding to a stop before the grand steps of Langford Royale. Camera flashes burst outside, the light from paparazzi who routinely camped around the hotel. A tall figure stepped out of the lead vehicle, clad in a flawless charcoal suit, black leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, his eyes colder than the Manhattan night wind. The entire lobby fell completely silent. The brass-framed glass doors spun softly, letting out a crisp click that cut through the air like a blade. Every gaze in the Langford Royale lobby immediately turned toward the entrance, where Dominic Langford, billionaire, founder of the entire Langford Royale hotel empire, was stepping inside. No one announced his arrival, no one dared whisper his name, but everyone knew exactly who this man was. Dominic Langford, tall, composed, and commanding, like a living embodiment of power. The chandelier light reflected off his ash-grey suit, his face carved in stillness like marble. He wore no expression, but his eyes were colder than the Manhattan night air. Without a word, he walked past the lounge chairs, past the guests pretending not to watch, and stopped directly at the center of the room, where Clara still stood, her wrist gripped by Officer Daniels. She turned her head. Their eyes met, and in a single glance, Dominic understood everything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply spoke, low and sharp, like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Take your hand off my wife, now." That voice, barely louder than a whisper, struck deeper than any scream. It sliced through arrogance, self-importance, and elitist pride like thunder-cracking marble. Daniels let go of Clara's wrist, as if electrocuted, stepping back instantly. The entire lobby stood frozen. Someone dropped a wine glass without noticing. A waiter holding a tray of champagne stood motionless, eyes wide. Sophie Lynn was rooted behind the front desk, hands trembling. Ethan Brooks stood gaping, his face shifting from pale white to deep red. Not from shame, but from sheer horror. Dominic didn't look at them. He walked straight to Clara, gently placing a hand on her shoulder as if everything that had just happened wasn't enough to make her lower her head. "I'm sorry," he said, voice soft but steady, "that you had to stand in the very place I built and be treated like this." Clara nodded slightly. No words were needed. His presence, timely and deliberate, was the answer she had been hoping for. Then Dominic turned, and for the first time looked toward the reception desk. His voice remained calm, but now every word carried the weight of a verdict. "Ethan Brooks, Sophie Lynn, and Security Officer Daniels, as of this moment, you no longer work here. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. Some staff covered their mouths in shock. A few guests turned their phones toward Dominic, as if capturing a moment destined to become hotel history. "I want the entire management team in the boardroom on the 25th floor in 15 minutes, Dominic said firmly, not giving anyone time to respond. "Emergency meeting. And anyone involved in this, don't bother hiding. If you run, I will find you. And every opportunity you thought you had will vanish." He paused briefly. His eyes swept toward Mrs. Vance, still hiding behind a marble pillar, face frozen like a statue. "And to the guests who believe that money entitles them to look down on others, I suggest you find another place to stay. Langford Royale is no longer a haven for unchecked arrogance." The entire lobby fell silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Dominic turned to Clara, placing a hand gently on the small of her back. "Let's go. I'll take you to your room myself." The elevator doors opened. The two stepped in, just the two of them, with the chandelier's glow reflecting off the marble floor, like a final declaration that kindness is never weakness. And behind them, the revolving doors turned slowly once more. But this time, they didn't bring in cold air. They carried the winds of a storm of reckoning. As the elevator doors closed behind Dominic and Clara, the lobby of Langford Royale remained frozen in time. Everyone present, from hotel guests and bellhops to shift managers, felt as if they had just witnessed a stunning reversal of roles in a high-stakes play. And they weren't the leads. Clara sat quietly in the presidential suite on the 25th floor, her hand still trembling slightly. But Dominic simply took her hand and held it. He said nothing. And in that silence, warm, steady, and heavy with meaning, was the strongest shield against the storm of humiliation she had just endured. Downstairs in a private boardroom, the emergency meeting had already begun. Dominic stood at the head of a long walnut conference table, scattered with internal reports, security camera footage, and a stack of guest complaints he had never been shown before. Ethan Brooks, Sophie Lynn, and Officer Daniels sat at the far end of the table, their heads bowed in shame. Across from them sat the regional manager, customer service director, and several of the corporation's legal advisors, each one dead silent. Dominic crossed his arms. His voice was calm, low, but every word landed like the blade of a cold, sharp knife. "I used to believe a luxury brand was defined by its decor, service, and location. But today I was reminded of something else. It starts with how people treat each other." He flipped over a printout from the customer feedback system. "This isn't the first time Langford Royale employees have been accused of discrimination, but you covered it up. Or worse, treated it like a minor inconvenience." Ethan stammered, "Mr. Langford, I—" Dominic raised a hand. Silence. "You saw my wife and chose to humiliate her, insult her, degrade her, simply because she wasn't dressed in designer clothes. You, Sophie, and Daniels, 3 different roles, but one common root: contempt for anyone who doesn't match your expectations." Sophie's eyes welled with tears. Daniels stared into the floor. Dominic looked each of them in the eye, then said slowly, "You didn't just shame my wife. You disgraced the very values this empire was built on." A beat of silence. Then he nodded toward the door. It opened, and Clara walked in. The entire room tensed. No one had expected the woman they had just dismissed like an outsider to now walk in as a witness, a voice of authority, and the soul behind the decision about to be made. Dominic introduced her briefly. "This is Clara Hayes, my wife, and as of today, she is the internal human dignity advisor for the entire Langford Hotel network." He turned back to Ethan, Sophie, and Daniels. "I'm not firing you. Not because you deserve to stay, but because I want you to lead the process of making things right." All three looked up, stunned. Dominic continued, "Starting tomorrow, you will participate in a comprehensive human values reorientation program led by Clara. Then you'll each stand before every employee in this system and share what you've learned. Not to seek forgiveness, but to serve as a lesson." Sophie whispered, her voice cracking, "Why? Why give us this chance?" Clara stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "Because if even you, the ones who hurt me, can change, then this hotel truly has a chance to become something better." A deep silence settled over the room, and for the first time, the three people who once looked down on Clara bowed their heads, not out of fear, but because they had just seen their reflection in a mirror of raw truth. And they didn't like what they saw. The next morning, an internal email was sent across the entire Langford Hotel system. "Urgent, launch of Dignity Reset Program, the new core of luxury service." It was signed by Dominic Langford, and below the signature line a new title stood out. Program advised directly by Mrs. Clara Hayes, Human Dignity and Guest Experience Supervisor. On the 15th floor of Langford Royale, the main conference room had been transformed into a special training space. Ethan Brooks sat at the head of the table, his once sharp demeanor now noticeably dulled. Sophie Lynn was there too, her hair tied back neatly, eyes lowered. Officer Daniels sat with arms crossed, silent, but no longer with the cold air of someone who believes they're always right, but with the caution of someone who knows they've been wrong. On the large screen, a video played, ragged children drawing at the Brooklyn shelter. One of them, a curly-haired girl holding a crayon, sketching a small house, turned to the camera and said, "Miss Clara says everyone deserves a place to come home to." Clara stood at the front, but she didn't speak about herself. She spoke about the forgotten. She told the story of a 12-year-old boy who only wished to eat at a diner once without being kicked out for wearing a dirty shirt. Of an elderly man who was denied medical care because he didn't have insurance, but still sent a handwritten thank you note to the hospital because they turned him away politely. "No one remembers five-star service," Clara said, meeting each person's gaze, "if they're treated with contempt. But they will never forget a respectful glance, even when you can't give them anything else." Ethan looked down. Sophie wiped her eyes. Daniels nodded for the first time. The final step in the training was called Facing the Truth. Each of the three, Ethan, Sophie, and Daniels, had to read aloud their written statements, recounting how they had treated Clara in front of the entire staff. Sophie went first, her voice trembling. "I used to think I was protecting the hotel's reputation, but the truth is, I was staining it." Ethan followed, lifting his head for the first time. "I don't remember how many sarcastic remarks I made. I only remember how her face never changed. And I realized she was stronger than all of us." When Daniels reached the line, I grabbed the hand of a kind woman as if she were a criminal. The entire room fell silent. Clara didn't interrupt. She simply placed her hand over her heart, a quiet personal vow that forgiveness must come with change. Dominic stood at the back of the room, silently witnessing it all. To him, this was no longer just a staff training session. It was a humanitarian revolution inside a world long consumed by glamour and profit. As the session ended, Clara stepped out into the hallway. Her eyes met those of a young housekeeper. The girl gave a slight bow, then whispered, "Thank you." I don't feel ashamed to wear my uniform to work anymore." Clara smiled. That was a reward greater than any praise or title. When someone finally dares to lift their head high, because they've been treated with the dignity they've always deserved. 2 weeks later, a light rain fell in the late afternoon. Langford Royale was no longer just a cold, distant building. It had begun to breathe, like a living organism pulsing with compassion. At the front desk, Sophie Lynn was speaking with a middle-aged woman. The woman's coat was soaked, her hair disheveled, and her hands trembling as she handed over a bundle of tattered papers. I didn't book in advance. I just got back from the ER with my granddaughter, and I don't have the strength to go home. I was wondering if—" Sophie stayed silent. In the past, she would have frowned, fabricated an excuse about being fully booked, and coldly sent the guest away. But today, her eyes simply softened. Then she gave a small nod. "Is your granddaughter okay, Ma'am?" The woman looked up, surprised. Sophie said nothing more. She simply gestured for a staff member to prepare a room quickly, then returned with a cup of hot tea, carefully placed in the woman's hands. "Room 408 is ready for you. Please rest. Let us take care of the rest." In a quiet corner of the lobby, Clara Hayes stood behind a marble column, witnessing the entire exchange. She didn't step forward. She simply tightened her grip on her handbag, her gaze softening, as if someone had just laid another brick in the house of hope she was building. In the service corridor, Ethan Brooks was training 2 new employees. One of them asked, "Sir, what should we do if a guest shows up not dressed formally?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the front entrance, the same door where Clara had once entered and where he had humiliated her. Then he exhaled slowly and said, "Remember this, the true class of a hotel isn't measured by how guests are dressed, but by how we make them feel respected." The young employee nodded and jotted it down in his notebook, unaware that the woman standing quietly just a few feet down the hallway was the very reason those words had meaning. In the afternoon tea lounge, Officer Daniels, the man who once grabbed Clara's wrist like she was a criminal, was now clearing tables, helping an older staff member who was struggling with her tray. The cold enforcer he used to be was gone. What filled his eyes now was a quiet resolve, the kind of humility that comes only after wrongdoing, and the will to make it right, one small gesture at a time. Clara passed by. Daniels saw her. They exchanged a glance. No apology was needed, just a single nod from both sides, and that was enough to let everything go. That evening, Dominic Langford returned to the hotel after a short business trip. He saw Clara sitting alone on the rooftop terrace, looking out over the glittering city. He walked over, didn't say anything. She tilted her head, smiled gently. "They're changing, aren't they?" Dominic sat beside her, gently took her hand. "They're learning how to be human again. And you are the reason why." The lights of Langford Royale spilled onto the streets, not just the glow of expensive chandeliers, but a different kind of light now. The light of empathy. The kind that turns a place into home, even if it's just for one night. 3 months after that fateful day, Langford Royale was no longer just the most luxurious 6-star hotel in the city. It had become the first in New York to earn a new title within the service industry: the Lighthouse of Dignity. Small stories began to spread online. An elderly homeless man was personally invited to the buffet dinner by Ethan Brooks. No receipt required. A single mother who had just lost her job received a quiet gift from Sophie Lynn, a 3-night stay voucher, because your daughter needs a quiet place to study during exam season. A young man who once lived in the Brooklyn homeless shelter was accepted as a front desk intern, his first-day mentor, none other than Officer Daniels. But the moment that truly shook the media was the unveiling of a bronze plaque, now proudly displayed in the center of Langford Royale's grand lobby. "We measure people by the heart they carry, not the wallet they bring. Clara Hayes. It wasn't a CEO's quote. It wasn't a marketing slogan. It was the raw, honest truth, spoken by a woman once cast out of this very place, who chose forgiveness instead. One late afternoon, Clara returned to the hotel, not to train, not to supervise, not to recover from pain, but simply to sit in the lobby cafe like anyone else. A new staff member approached, smiling softly. "What would you like to order, ma'am?" Clara looked at the young woman, still fresh, eyes still clear, and smiled. "A peppermint tea. And if you have time, tell me about one beautiful story you witnessed today." The girl blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? A beautiful story?" Clara nodded. "This hotel has plenty. I used to be living proof of that." Before the young employee could fully understand what she meant, Dominic Langford entered the lobby. No motorcade, no press, just a man searching for his wife in a crowd. He reached her, placed a soft kiss on her forehead, and sat down beside her, saying nothing. Together, they watched the stream of guests coming and going, now including weathered coats, scuffed shoes. Yet everyone was welcomed like they belonged. An elderly guest walked by, paused to read the bronze plaque, then smiled. "Now that's real class." Clara turned to Dominic, took his hand gently. "I didn't change the whole world, but at least we made this one place feel like home." Dominic looked at her and whispered, "And because of you, it has a soul." The setting sun bathed the Langford Royale in golden light, and for the first time the building didn't reflect extravagance, but a heart that now beat, warm and human, beneath its marble skin. Not everyone who wears designer clothes carries true grace, and not everyone in a worn-out coat and scuffed backpack deserves to be turned away. Clara Hayes didn't need revenge. She chose to let those who humiliated her face their own conscience, not with power, but with unyielding kindness. If you've ever been judged for how you look, what you do, or where you come from, remember this: your true worth isn't defined by someone else's gaze, but by how you treat yourself and even those who may not deserve your kindness. Langford Royale has changed, and hopefully, after this story, the world outside will change too. Just a little, for you, and for everyone who's ever been quietly pushed to the margins. If you believe that compassion can shake an entire system, hit like, share, and subscribe to join us in telling more quiet but powerful stories like this one.